men have a really rough time going through this because they suffer just as much as women. They cry, they fall apart, they feel they can't go on living, they feel horrible about being so weak. They blame themselves. They've never seen a man go through, nobody's ever cried this much as a man. They don't realize, no, it's universal. Men go through awful, awful crisis just like women do. No difference.
The journey from abandonment to healing had such a profound impact on my life. Like, I feel emotional even saying that. It helped me get through a particularly difficult breakup about a year ago. But more importantly, it helped me do this work of this kind of healing that I had to do from wounds that were left over from childhood. So I am super excited to talk about all of that. But can we start? Do you mind just telling us briefly about yourself and your involvement in this abandonment work? And then I will ask about how you grew up.
Okay, I'm all set. The story that's probably most significant to help people understand my work is that I had my own adult abandonment experience. With the love of my life, my marital partner of 18 years, we were madly in love. I was madly in love. And it was so devastating when he left that I was really, really overwhelmed. I was devastated to the point of almost feeling that I couldn't survive it. And I knew it wasn't unusual. I'm a psychotherapist who has actually specialized in heartbreak, loss, and abandonment with my clients. And I worked in a psychiatric hospital for years, looking at the people who were my clients, the patients in the hospital, as people who were feeling a lot of separation anxiety because they were locked away from their families and locked away from society to a large extent. So I had a special, sensitivity to the abandonment issue. I used the term separation anxiety at the time more than I did the word abandonment. Abandonment was kind of a stigmatized term. But then when the love of my life, my marital partner, walked out and left me for another woman, the word abandonment was the word that really said it. And there was nothing in the literature, nothing spoke to this kind of pain, nothing explained how someone leaving you can cause your self-esteem to plummet. Because at the time, I was at the top of my career as a psychotherapist and doing all kinds of projects about, increasing family bonds and sort of working on prevention with abandonment. I had all these programs. And at the time, I was very confident and very happy, and all of a sudden devastated. So that is an important part of my history. And another important part is I grew up in a family, oldest of four, in New York State, north of the Hudson River. And a nice, happy family. But of course, families all have their situations. And one of the things that complicated mine is that as a child, I had been severely obese. And I couldn't find anyone to sit with me in the cafeteria at lunch. I felt very ostracized and bullied. And it left an enormous impact on me. And that impact became the sensitivity that allowed me to become a therapist and really understand emotional vulnerability. When I was 11, I went on a diet, lost weight, and suddenly had a million friends, which is such a trauma in itself, that one's popularity is dependent on one's fitting in and looking like everyone else. It has opened my mind and my heart to other people ever since. So then to have my partner leave me, that wound of not finding anyone to sit with me in the cafeteria, that wound opened up. So the past and the present kind of merge into one gigantic emotional crisis. And of course, because I was going through this, I started to do research into I knew psychology had nothing on this. Self-help simplified it under the word heartbreak. So I began to research into, brain science and anthropology and all animal psychology. Animal studies were very important. Philosophy. I began to really, and also Eastern philosophy, Eastern techniques of relaxation. And the research that I did took a long time because I'm not myself a scientist, so I had to get a sort of a mentor to help me interpret very difficult remote studies that helped explain why the self-esteem dips. This was in animal studies. It was 3 years of intensive research and to understand the biophysiology of it. Why does it cause such a collapse? How can it? Why would the abandonment wound? And I gained a great deal of insight and learned a lot about tools that really were effective, as opposed to the tools that I had been using as a psychotherapist, that I realized when I went through this experience, they were not sufficient. My new tools are very, they're doing tools. One has to do one's way through abandonment. You have to take action. They're active tools. But when I learned these tools, I began to apply them to myself. And I practiced them for a long time and realized that these tools actually gave me an opportunity to benefit from my abandonment experience rather than be diminished by it. So I share those tools wherever I can in the world.
Yeah. And yeah, when I found your book, because I guess the edition I have is from the year 2000, and I kind of couldn't believe when I was going through this heartbreak that was so painful. And it's as you describe, like reading this book, it was like, because it's just so hard to find material. It's like I am suffering so much, and where are the books? Like, where are the resources to help me through this? And then reading your book, and it's like it can feel like a knife wound to the heart. And it was literally like, this is exactly how I'm feeling. Like how you talk about the pain can be so bad. It's like almost feels like death would be less painful. It's, yeah, to have this written down and yeah, as well as what you're saying, like the opportunity, how it is like it opens this wound. I think you say the site of the wound, the deepest wound is the site of the greatest healing, because it's all these kind of wounds combined, and tearing it open, you are kind of forced to go deep, but then it becomes this amazing opportunity if you choose to take responsibility and to do the work.
Yes, as soon as people are exposed to the fact that there's something they can do, most people say, "Okay, I'm on board," because the alternative, just to be in that pain, is what most people are stuck with. But it's like open heart surgery. It's as painful without an anesthesia, by the way. Open heart surgery without anesthesia. You're ripped open and you've been severed from your Siamese twin without anesthesia. You are ripped open, and now you can clean out the wound. There's so much you can do. It's not at the beginning, of course, the pain is still there as you're working on it, but you work that through. It starts to become meaningful. You get into abandonment recovery, and you stay in abandonment recovery indefinitely, because once you realize that there are primal feelings inside, they become such a gift to your inner self. They become such an important part of what keeps you in touch with what's important. And you mentioned death. Yeah, the abandonment wound started out when we were infants. We all had abandonment trauma, and we were all in a position to be dependent on a caretaker. If that caretaker disappeared, we would die. We needed a caretaker or caretakers, and we were dependent. And then in early society, if we didn't act right and didn't cooperate with the group that we traveled with, our so-called tribe, or, our crowd of people, we would be ostracized. And that would mean death. You can't survive on your own out in the wilderness forever. You need people in order to survive. So we have a life and death kind of association with abandonment. So when we go through, we could have a huge amount of friends and a great family, go through abandonment, a heartbreak, but unconsciously it feels like life and death. And a lot of people do commit suicide and homicide when they go through this. It's so overwhelming. It's not uncommon. We hear about it in the news all the time. But most of us just wish we were dead and think about, oh, if only I could just end it because it's so painful. But the idea of death, the stakes are so high because the inner child is feeling, I can't live without this person. I can't survive this.
Mm. Yeah, and you talk about that as well. It's like the pain directed towards yourself. That was another breakup I had where, yeah, it was so painful that it honestly was like, I just don't want to exist because the pain's unbearable. But then it becomes directed. Then I ended up depressed because it was like all this pain, like relating to that self-esteem point, that it becomes like I must be worthless, like there must be something wrong with me, and it totally destroys your confidence. But it's, the way you describe it, it's like it's so exactly the experience I had. So yeah, I'm just so grateful that this book is there and it's such a good resource for anyone who's experiencing this, especially because, yeah, especially with, I think, for men, especially going through breakups and divorce and the rates of suicide.
Yes, the rates of suicide and homicide. Men have a really rough time going through this because they suffer just as much as women. They cry, they fall apart, they feel they can't go on living, they feel horrible about being so weak. They blame themselves. They've never seen a man go through, nobody's ever cried this much as a man. They don't realize, no, it's universal. Men go through awful, awful crises just like women do. No difference. I mean, there are probably differences somehow with testosterone and things like that, but those differences are negligible. Men hurt the same way women do, but men don't have as many social supports as most women do. It helps if you have a bunch of friends and they can act as sort of, you wear out this friend talking their ear off, and then you have another friend you can obsess to, and then this one starts to recover, the ear grows back, but meanwhile you're working on a third friend and wearing her ears off, and you can go back to the first one, and you can kind of have these different people to shoulder some of your pain. At least you can share it. You have someone to cry to. You're not abjectly alone. But most men, I mean, they may have one buddy that they can really cry to, but they don't feel terribly comfortable sniffling and crying for the third or fourth month or fifth month. They begin to look weak and like there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. It's normal to be miserable for months and months and months and months, unable to get out of bed. But men don't have the social supports. Some do, but most don't. Some women don't have them. It's just as tough for them. They don't have those social supports. This can happen to you when all your friends have moved or someone's died, and you can go through this. It's really hard no matter what, but it's so much easier if there's someone in your life who you can cry to. But men really are generally disadvantaged in that regard. So, what do they do when you're all alone going through this and people say, move on, what's wrong with you? You've got to snap out of it, that kind of thing. They drink or they use drugs. They crawl in a hole. Women do this too, depending on how many supports are there. And you mentioned about the self-esteem peace. And, it's the swirl, 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 that stands for shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting. And they're similar to the stages of death and dying that Kubler-Ross made. But where they're different is the fact that it damages self-esteem. When someone dies, there is some loss of self-esteem. There is, because you still fault yourself. You still beat yourself up for being so emotional, or for being so weak, and maybe causing the death, or not being able to rise above it, or missing that special person who made you feel good, and they're not there making you feel good. So there's still some self-esteem loss when someone dies. If it's suicide, then you do beat yourself up, and you do lose self-esteem. But if it's a different type of death, generally there still is some self-esteem. But when somebody dumps you, a relationship fails, it's, I'm not enough. I always knew it. This is proof. I just don't have what it takes. I don't know how to hold on to a person's love. I'm not attachment worthy. I'm not keepable. I'm not able to compel a person to stay with me. I'm not able to make a relationship work. I mean, it goes on and on. And where does this shame come from? It comes again from, from early childhood, when we were very little and we were becoming early toddlers, we learned that we could go coo, coo, and make pretty bubbles, and parents would come to our side. We learned to cry and bring parents to our side, but they didn't always come to our side. We felt at times powerless. We're dying of starvation, lying in our crib, lonely, scared, and we're going coo, coo, coo. Nobody's coming. We're crying. Nobody's coming. We accumulate feelings of not being powerful. And so those feelings are in a child. They don't have words. This is wordless stuff, but it's a wordless feeling of I'm not enough. I don't count. I'm puny. I'm unimportant. I just don't, I can't compel. I don't have the power to compel. And that's the shame. That's universal. Everyone has that. Everyone. People don't want to admit they have it always. It's very hard to talk about one's feelings of not being enough and feeling unworthy. But those are the feelings that being rejected triggers. It's like part of that open heart surgery. Here are these horrible shame feelings that everyone has. But at the time that we're feeling them, we think, no, this is proof of my unworthiness. Not everyone has this. I am uniquely unworthy. I have rot inside of me, and it must have turned off the other person. Or, that those feelings don't feel like, oh, I'm having a universal human experience. They don't feel like that. They feel very personal and proof of our unworthiness. So that's where the two types of grief, grieving a death and grieving from rejection or abandonment, that's where they differ in that element there.
Yeah. And that's what, I absolutely love the start of your book. You talk about what is abandonment. It's not this idea of like a child being left on a doorstep. It can look like so many different things, like divorce, or like a parent being hospitalized, or like your friends, bullying, as you referred to, or coming out as gay and anticipating a reaction, or all these different things. And you had in there another child. You had like the birth of a younger sibling, but you also had another child being sick, which is my abandonment wound. And that made me feel so seen, because that's the first time I'd ever seen that written down, when it's like, I feel this wound, but it's not like, I have amazing parents and I'm from a loving family and all of this, but there was nothing until I saw that. It's like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. That is what I'm experiencing. And I'm wondering if you because I only then realized all of that, and my mum helped me work it out after I'd suffered this like abandonment later in life, and then was going digging to find like, because this wound was so much deeper than that. And I wonder if that's the same for you. Like, were you aware in childhood of, I mean, apart from, because yeah, you mentioned in the book something about your mum being in hospital and not really having this memory, and there was a period where you were away from your parents.
Yeah, and I have trouble, as I had more trouble than I do now, but I have trouble waiting. If I'm meeting you on a street corner at 2 o'clock and it's 2:01, I think we'll never meet. I'll never find out what happened to her. She's gone. She's disappeared in thin air. I have like an anxiety about waiting, that the person's never coming and that it will never be explained. And it's an anxiety that is so irrational. And then 2 minutes later, there you are. But I have trouble waiting, and it used to be really bad, where I would really be like rocking and, really in pain waiting. And it came from childhood, with my parents not visiting me in the hospital when I had my tonsils out because they didn't know they could. That was their excuse anyway. And I was like thinking that I was abandoned. And that has a lasting impact. And when something has a lasting impact, we call it not just post-traumatic stress, but post-traumatic stress disorder, because it stays. It's part of the permanent thing. But it makes it very dramatic to call it post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We all have it. We all have PTSD. We're all impacted by early experiences, some of them temporarily, but many of it's permanent. That makes us who we are. It doesn't mean we're all basket cases and, need to be reprogrammed. It just means we're human and these things affected us. But yeah, the childhood stuff that goes on, having a sick sibling, it does so many things. And I've had, I run workshops, so I get to hear in one grouping, I get to hear people's variety of abandonment issues. And of course that is one, because it does so many things. That it's secondary abandonment because your parents are going through something with a sick child. It's not like a laid back family where it's all about you and how cute you are and how important you are. They're going through something. So you're experiencing your parents going through something. And you are feeling that because you're a child. You don't have it all sorted out intellectually. It's wordless anyway. So it's just sensations that you're picking up. And you're not special. You're not important. Somebody else is more important. It would be selfish of you to be demanding because, it's somebody else's pain or whatever is more important. So all of these messages in the best of families with the best of intentions, who handle it brilliantly and say all the right things to the child who's not sick, they can't make it go away. I mean, it's still going to create a wound that can be triggered later on.
Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe if we talk about some of the tools, because yeah, they helped me so much. The dialogue with your inner child is like amazing. That I started doing that, yeah, I guess a year ago, and it's yeah, so transformative, like opening this dialogue and having a dialogue of compassion. So
Yeah, the dialogue is life-changing. The idea is that you have to use your imagination to personify that there's a part of you that is just your emotions, your feelings, your desires, your needs, your excitements, your fears, your sadness, your anger. There's a part of you that contains all of that emotion. You have to sort of personify that and call that your inner child. It's similar to the traditional inner child, but it's the one that we use for abandonment recovery is younger, and it contained younger in the sense that it doesn't yet have great words and it doesn't react. It's just the emotions. And it contains the abandonment wound. It contains the hidden shame that I just referred to and the fear of abandonment, the fear of being disconnected. You know, the fear is the fear of disconnection, and the shame is feeling unworthy of connection. So, it contains that primal stuff in addition to everything else. But the thing is that, and this is true for me too, we take it for granted that we already know what we're feeling. I make this same mistake. I don't need to do a dialogue because I already know what I'm feeling. No, I don't. I have to ask the right questions. And when I do, I find out what I'm feeling. Because underneath the main feeling, there are other feelings. And then underneath those, there are more feelings. So when I take the time to tune in and actually write a dialogue with my own inner child, I find out that I'm feeling all kinds of things that I didn't realize. No, I don't know what I'm feeling. I have to ask. Just like in a friendship, you could have a friend who doesn't know how to ask questions. This is stereotypic about men. I find that there are women too who don't know how to don't know how to draw out the other person, but it's a skill that a lot of people really don't have. They know how to talk, but they don't know how to say, and what about you, Delia? How did you feel about that? They don't know how to ask that question there. They don't know enough. So you know what it feels like to be going through something and you're with a friend you love and there's so much fun and it's great and you enjoyed every minute of their time, but you walked away and what you were going through never got addressed. It's not a terrible thing. You get it, but everyone's had that experience. Well, that's what goes on in a relationship with yourself. You can go about your day and have all these things happen, but once you personify it, there really is an inner child. You make it real. There is an inner child who hasn't been asked any questions, hasn't been drawn out, hasn't been heard from, and there's all kinds of stuff that the inner child is feeling. So the big little dialogue, the inner child dialogue, creates a brand new relationship with the self, because you actually create a caring, loving, administering relationship with yourself. You don't just say nice words, I love you just the way you are. You give love to the child behaviorally. You do nice things for the child, and you draw the child out asking really good questions to get underneath what it's feeling so you could really find out. And then you can really feel motivated. You feel lonely? Oh, you feel bored? Oh, my poor little thing. Well, how about if I sign up for a group we'll join a walking group. How about that? Yes, I want a walking group. You find out what you can do behaviorally to make your inner child happy, and you do it for your inner child. But you didn't even know you needed to do it until you got into the dialogue. So the antidote to abandonment is you have the open heart surgery, you have all of these emotions. You now have an inner child that's so desperate for help. It is so needy. When you've been abandoned, that kid is screaming. And now you begin to form a relationship. And it's the relationship between your adult self and your inner child self. And that relationship is profound. It's the beginning of the first real relationship that you have with yourself. It's a whole new healthy relationship. And it is life-changing, because what it does is it strengthens your adult self. Normally, the adult self takes tests when we go to school and studies. And, if you have to make a list and plan, it's there. If you need to get airline reservations, it goes online and goes crazy but then your adult self says, okay, bye. And out comes your outer child, this other thing that acts on rote. It procrastinates, it overeats, it shops too much, it scrolls through the cell phone. It's the other thing that doesn't think, that isn't helping us in any way except it's self-indulgent. It's helping us that way, but it's not achieving anything. But when you do the dialogue, your adult self, who's in charge, wants to give little you a good life, that strengthens the adult self to be more in focus. So when you do it, you start accomplishing stuff because you're more in focus.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, talking about that overindulging, it's amazing. I think you have, because I think people really have to try this, or you just don't get it until you write it down, because you have no idea what's got this inner child speaks to you, and you can't possibly imagine what it's going to say until you try it. But you have examples in the book, and there's one which has happened to me, where the inner child kind of calls you out, like you're saying, like, oh, I care about you, and then it's like, well, if you care about me, why do you keep like overeating or doing these harmful behaviors? Like, why aren't you looking after me? And it's really like, is this wake up call of like, actually, yeah, you start being more responsible.
Well, the outer child is sort of like always trying to talk you into doing the most passive, self-indulgent thing. So you're reading my book, which says in words, do not just read this. Take your pen out and write the exercise. Do it now. Don't just read it, do it. And you're reading that, and your outer child says, yeah, we're reading that. That's good. That's enough. We don't have to do it. We just have to read it. See, I can picture myself writing the dialogue, and yeah, she's saying do it, but I'm reading the do it, so I'm getting credit because I'm reading that. So the outer child tries to convince us that you don't really need to do. You just need to talk about it, think about it, obsess about it, read about it, whatever. It can be more passive. And that's the outer child, because you'll get the most mileage out of the exercise if you do it in writing. It goes like this. Writing is the best. People hate writing, some people. You got to do the writing. It's not good for everyone because they hate writing, but that's the best. Then the next one is talking it out loud. And then comes thinking it, having it in your head. And then the least effective is reading about it. It's better than nothing, but that's the least effective. And people could agree, yeah, you're right. Yeah, writing it is the top, the one that changes you the most. That doesn't mean their outer child's going to let them do it. They're going to think, but in my case, I can read it and get it. I don't need to do it. So there is so much resistance to getting people to actually do the dialogue. That's why I run workshops, because I can sit there and, get them to do it.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that as well, because you have some of these case studies in the book, which we were talking about it. Yeah, when you're suffering, you feel so alone. You have no concept that it's universal. But reading these stories of people, you're like, oh my God, like it's not just me. And there's hope as well.
Yeah, the idea that as you read the book, it reduces some of your shame. If you get in a group and talk about it in a group, that reduces shame even better. But if you read the book, as you're reading and discovering the universality of all these feelings and that it's normal, you're not the only one who has that much self-doubt and who feels that this rejection proves that you're just not enough, that you're not worthy or whatever. You're not the only one. That every single person who goes through this, goes through something similar to that this is the way the human mind reacts to being thrown out, to being discarded, to having a failure in a relationship. It reduces a lot of the shame.
The other thing that's really stuck with me over this year that I still use is the dreamscape. And I still since then have this really strong image of the kind of yeah, safe space I created for myself. So how does that work?
Um, almost every other tool in its five Acero exercises, you have getting into the moment, and that's the modality to constantly get into the moment any chance you can, because that's how to get through life the best, to be in the moment as much as possible, and then use your imagination to create positive imagery projected into the future. That's number two. And then the big little dialogue, and then the outer child awareness. And then at the end, there's future self, creating a plan, an action plan. The one that I don't have, scientific evidence for, although some evidence is there, is the dreamscape. Why does it help the mind visualize, have imagery that represents your future and things working out? Why does that help the mind? And I thought I was very excited when I started studying mirror neurons, because it explains how you learn by observing. And when I was a teenager, we used to watch American Bandstand, and we would watch this sort of a way of sashaying and moving your hips, and it was kind of cool. There was a way to do it in a way that wasn't cool. And when I got done watching it, I could go dance and do it pretty well. I'd have to practice a little bit, but basically watching taught me how to do it. Children who grow up in a fisher family where the father goes out in a special boat and spears fish for a living, that child who goes with his father is learning how to spear the fish without actually doing it. But his watching, the mirror neurons rehearse, the brain rehearses. So I thought, this is why it works. I know the exercise works. I just didn't know why. But then the science on the mirror neurons got kind of murky, and there are disputes about how valid all of that is. So I have to just say, more needs to be discovered scientifically. The part that I know is that creating positive imagery in the mind is very good for the mind. It nurtures the mind. It gives the mind a sense of hope and direction. Like, this is possible. If you can picture it, you can aim at it. Even if you're not doing it consciously, you put those images up there, and they're there. Your mind has a focal point to kind of aim at. And the example that I use a lot is, think about the Eiffel Tower. And it started out as an idea in some guy's mind, a very unlikely idea. In Paris, you're going to put up a bunch of sticks made out of steel in this elegant city. It just didn't make sense that this idea of an Eiffel Tower, which served no purpose, was going to get put in Paris and be an eyesore in the middle of all these buildings. It was so unlikely, but it started out as an idea in his mind. And it must have been a really, really important idea, because it managed to go from being an idea in one person's mind to actually now existing in Paris. Think of the power of that idea leading to behavior. It wouldn't have been built without behaviors. So think of the power of that idea, and how it helped the mind fall into, like, dented his brain, that his behaviors fell into that pattern of getting that thing built. So we need to create Eiffel Towers in our own life that are future wonderful things, and put the image up there as often as can. I recommend 3 times a day to visualize real quick, a few seconds at a time, the dream house that represents, the positive future, or even just thinking about positive, pretending that you've already achieved a goal and pretending how good that feels. But that positive imagery is very helpful to the brain. It's nurturing for the brain.
Mm-hmm. And looking back now on the abandonment you suffered, how do you feel about it now? of your husband, the marriage of 18 years ending?
The negative after effect is that if I lose something like a sock, I think, where could a sock have gone? How does a dryer eat a sock? It's around here somewhere. I have an overreaction to something disappearing. It's not terrible, but it does cause me to search for too long instead of giving up quickly. Aside from that, it's been a gift. It's such a gift because I really loved him and he loved me too. I mean, there was love there, but that can happen. It made me really accept how little control we have outside of ourselves, that we can control our own person, and we can only really control our behavior because we can't control our feelings. They're involuntary. They arrive. We have reactions, but we can do things to change the behaviors that, for instance, if you wake up severely depressed, you can't turn that off on a switch, but you could get up, put your shoes on, go for a walk, and then get in the car and go to the mall, and then it's closed, damn it, and then go back home. But you've done a couple of things, and maybe that helps to lift the depression behaviorally, but you can't take a switch and turn off the depression.
Mm-hmm.
It's all what you do and how you change your environment a little bit. So it's the whole thing about going through abandonment and experiencing the gift that it is. It really, nothing could have been better for me. And for other people I know who have turned it into an opportunity for growth. You have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is lasting impact, which isn't always so terrible. It's a very dramatic term. But you also have post-traumatic growth. You go through something painful, and it forces growth, especially if you know how to handle the feelings. And instead of PTSD, you have PTG, post-traumatic growth. And you feel it, and you wouldn't trade your experience for anything in the world.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, now I guess you've been able to help so many people as a result of that.
The idea of sharing the path, that being able to have it sort of go out there, and my website and my books and workshops and things of that sort, and podcasts, helping other people see, oh no, abandonment is terribly painful, but it's the beginning of profound recovery.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I know you have to go. So to wrap up, whereabouts in upstate New York did you grow up? Because I spent some time at Cornell, so I know
it
the
wasn't
area.
that far upstate. It was Rockland County, right over the George Washington Bridge. My town was Pearl River, and the county was Rockland County.
Nice. Okay, so last 3 questions. How do you stay grounded?
I have to say that the getting into the moment, keeping positive imagery in my mind, being aware that, like everyone else in the world, I have a very active outer child who loves to procrastinate and has unrealistic expectations, and I have that going on, but I have the relationship with myself. That's what helps me stay grounded. Recognizing that I can't assume that I know what I'm feeling, that I really do have to sort of get in there and ask some questions, and just to have that connection. It's the head-heart connection. Have that be so close. That's what does it.
So do you do that dialogue still now?
I do. Yes, I do.
Amazing. Okay, next question. Is there a book that's had a big influence on your life?
Many books. I would say that Richard Robertiello's book, which is called Big You, Little You. There's more to the title. I can't think of the exact title, but it's in my reference. That had a tremendous impact. But while I was doing the research, books and articles by Sapolsky and Hoffer, these and Panksepp. These are amazing researchers who were researching stress or the opioid system, but reading their work and the fact that they painstakingly explained it in a way that they weren't intending for a lay person to understand it, but I got help to understand it. But explaining it so well that even I was able to see what they were talking about and then extrapolate from that onto how that really explains the way human beings react to these things.
Hmm. And last question, what 3 words describe the best version of you?
Um, I would say empathetic, always searching and reaching, and positive.
Amazing. And where can people find you and find your books?
Well, they can find me on abandonment.net. The books are in the library: Journey from Abandonment to Healing, Taming Your Outer Child, Black Swan, which is a fable, very, very quickly read, but really good, and the workbook. They can find all of those on my website, at Amazon, any bookstore, and the library. And the workshops, I publicize when the workshops are coming on my website. So I have videotapes that go over the 5 Akero exercises that are the program. People have requested a way to reinforce what they learn in the books or workshops, or just to do that instead of read a book. Some people want to download it instead.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.